Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Tony, and Noel-Ann for the invitation to speak here. So, I'm a mathematician at Middlesex University. Let me press the buttons to share the slides, because then we can get going in earnest. That one, I think. Great. So, all being well, you can see the version without my notes. Okay, so yeah, so I want to talk to you about authentic non-exam assessments. There was a question in the chat on the previous talk about exactly what we mean by authenticity. There's no hard definition, but I'll have a go with one of, I think, Middlesex's institutional definition, which I think has been lifted from somewhere. But I'll talk to you about what that means in the context of mathematics. So this is work that's been done with my colleagues at Middlesex and at UCL, and we formed a little research group called the MESH Research Group, which is Mathematics in Education, Society and History, where we pontificate about these things. So first of all, a bit of a background to the two maths at Middlesex. So what we offer. So in 2014, we launched a new maths and postgraduate provision after it had been absent from the university for some time. And there were some elements which we'll identify as kind of authentic later in this new provision, and that included some non-traditional assessment in modules such as problem-solving methods, which is 30 credits at level 5, which is all about trying to get students to solve problems in a kind of an abstract way rather than as being problem solving attached to, say, a calculus course. So it was just dedicated to can students apply appropriate methods to solve problems. And then also at level 6, had a module on communicating mathematics to try and develop those presentation skills and think about audiences and all that kind of thing. So that was in early days there in the degree. In 2021 then, the maths team actually removed all exams from all the maths modules. So I suppose I should be slightly careful about the definition of an exam here. So this is a final summative high stakes piece of assessment, controlled piece of assessment. So not an in-class test, which is typically kind of 20% of an overall grade, which we still have those in a handful of modules, but they're unusual. So, and what this forced us to do was to place so-called authentic assessment in traditional modules. So we still have modules with titles like mathematical analysis. And so what do we mean by authentic assessment there? Again, definition slightly later. And then just to steal our thunder ever so slightly, the institution then the following year decided to remove all exams from all modules across everything in the university, apart from those with PSRB exemptions. So we went from being leading in the university to being just another suite of programs that didn't have exams. And then in 2022, we launched our maths and data science. So that's the provision at Middlesex. But you know, in terms of our institutional background, so we have 59% of our full-time undergraduates are from IMD quintiles 1 or 2, and 38% were eligible for free school meals. So in terms of deprivation, we have a higher proportion than most other universities. And one of the things we discovered is that digital poverty does kind of give a significant obstacle to success for our students. So this is interesting from, there's an Ipsos Mori piece called on Generation Z. And the argument there is that digital poverty is not about access to devices. Every student has a smartphone, roughly. But there is a significant difference between IMD quintile 1 and 5 about how students have learnt to use the technology that's in their hand. And roughly, IMD quintile 1 uses it for entertainment, and IMD quintile 5 uses it for education. But there's, yes, I should find a link to that study. But Ipsos Mori have done kind of a good piece about that. So what we did to kind of address this is we gave iPads to all of our undergraduate mathematicians. The idea is that then they would have a common platform to address, so we could address this digital poverty. So rather than saying, go and make a video about something, we could say, use your iPad using the apps that we have downloaded for you to go and do something. So we were starting from this kind of common framework there. And what that enabled us to do was to diversify our assessment diet, you know, to try to be more inclusive, to try and get some more choice for students so that they can decide how they best want to demonstrate their knowledge and their skills to us. Um, and at the same time, these students, they've typically not come to us as a first choice. So they're thinking perhaps because they didn't do as well in their A levels as they were expecting. So we're dealing with issues of lack of confidence for students, and you know, they're wondering, do I belong here? Is the cost worth it? Will I get a job at the end of this? And so we knew that it was absolutely critical to have developed kind of strong employability skills in our students, and also try to boost their social capital in terms of the mathematics exposure that they could have outside of the university. So as all part of this, when we revalidated in 2019 now, we thought, okay, how can we really change our approach to assessment? So we want to remove exams here and try to be more kind of employability led with more theory. So we still have some theory so a blend of the kind of best and old, the best of the old and the new, sorry, where we have traditional theory, but also more practical skills. So there's some traditional skills that we wanted to keep, such as, you know, abstraction, logical reasoning, critical thinking, that kind of thing, but also the technological communication and reflective skills and the social skills you need to collaborate and present as well. So very much part of this, we're thinking about how can we build students' confidence. And the overall approach, roughly, then, was to use this authentic assessment, which I'll detail in a second, and make sure that students have a variety of ways to demonstrate their learning. So authentic assessment then, so I'll give the institutional definition later, but roughly we separated this out into two distinct directions. So authentic assessment then is where the students are producing the output of their how they're showcasing their learning and or their skills is appropriate for professional roles. Now, no role, no profession requires people to write exams. So that's an example of inauthentic assessment. Whereas a presentation would be more authentic, solving the kind of task that one would get in employment would be more authentic, whether that's kind of writing code or analyzing data or something like that. And that's the authentic assessment angle, but then also to think about authentic problems. Now, in mathematics, you know, we have we understand the difference between a pure and an applied problem, but this is something else. I mean, authentic problem is where the input is the kind of input that you would get from a professional role. So of course, you know, when we write exam papers, it's really important that the questions are unambiguous. But ambiguity is part of employability, right? So you very rarely get a perfectly well-formed question, and so we want to kind of include that in the assessment so that then students can think about how they would interpret these questions and how they would go about responding to it. So that's kind of one of the distinctions we made there, and there's a list of employability skills that we're trying to develop with the assessment approach that we've taken. So just a very quick detour. So there's a wonderful paper by French et al. in 2023, which is a systematic review of exams in higher education. So this is 122 pedagogy papers have gone into this systematic review. And this is kind of collated and analysed. It's a very good read. I highly recommend it. I just want to kind of pull out my reading of this paper because although this kind of post-dates when we stripped out exams, I think it provides a good kind of evidence base for anyone who needs to convince whether it's quality assurance people or senior colleagues or whoever that maybe this is worth considering. So in this paper, the authors found that very few of the perceived academic benefits actually were present with exams, and there's substantial evidence for drawbacks. So, for example, one of the things we talk about with exams are benefits in exams help students recall and retain knowledge, and they are perfectly valid and reliable forms of assessment, and they are a very powerful tool to prevent to encourage academic integrity and prevent contract cheating. And with the meta-analysis here, or rather the systematic review, determines that actually there's very little evidence in the literature that these claims hold. So ultimately, the conclusion is that high stakes summative assessment are ill suited to deliver the benefits of how testing can force students to actually sit down and learn the information. There's something about this kind of cramming the night before a high stakes summative test that means that the students don't actually recall all this information. And in terms of kind of validity and reliability, this has been touched on in both talks so far, is that there's a myriad of different things that can affect student performance on exam day. So that has a huge effect on the reliability of the exam, but also so much of the variance in student performance is about how familiar they are with the particular test items. I think we've all had the experience of going into an exam and seeing, oh great, there's a question there which is very similar to one that I've practiced, or that was quite close to a past paper and I did that past paper, and that is very much kind of improving the overall grade compared to somebody who's not familiar with that particular question. And also on kind of contract cheating. So French et al. Cite this McCabe's 2005 study with over a third of students of 64,000 North American students admitted to some form of exam cheating. So cheating does happen in exams. We can't be kind of blind to the fact that this is going on. And so the idea that yes, perhaps other assessment methods are perhaps easier to cheat on. We can't think that exams are a complete solution to that. They also talk about, conscious of time, so we'll skip over some of these. So they also talk extensively about kind of exams and well-being, and critically that there are a lot of kind of negative health impacts with exams. So increased feelings of shame, low self-esteem, and there are differentials in gender. So, for example, suicidal ideation is higher in female students, according to this meta-analysis. And also there are cultural and genetic factors at play. So very much kind of exams have a quite dramatic effect on students' well-being. And as part of this meta-analysis, then the investment that students make towards their learning is kind of is geared towards maximizing their grades rather than their learning. So they are not actually demonstrating these higher order thinking skills. It's about memorizing as much as they can that will appear in exams later. And I've mentioned these kind of differentials, but there are kind of demonstrated differentials in gender, socioeconomic status, race and ethnicity, and disability. And the conclusion from French et al. Is there's compelling evidence that examinations can disadvantage marginalised groups. So this is all bad stuff, right? And we want to do something to mitigate against that. So one of the things we started in 2021 was a project called Teapots, so we had these iPads in the students' hands, and we wanted to use this technology to make sure students had choice in how they wanted, in how they could demonstrate that they're satisfied with learning outcomes to us. So to give an example of this, we always had a little bit of some elements of choice in the degree program from 2016. So this was in the communicating maths module, where we had a brief here where the students would write a communication piece or develop a communication piece to promote or engage people with mathematics. So choose a maths topic and communicate it with a particular audience. And here, critically, the students could choose one of three ways of doing this. So they could either be to actually make a maths activity, so a kind of written one, produce a blog, or make a short video. So here there was some student choice. Now, what we found here, this predates the handing out iPads to students, we found that students who had access to very good cameras and video editing software at home would opt for the video and produce some really highly polished stuff. And students who didn't have access to these things would do some of the other activities there. So there's also something inequitable about the choice that we gave them here, which is one of the things that we introduced iPads to mitigate against. But critically, with this sort of assessment, we had kind of feedback from students to say that they got this particular student, so they got a job as a data analyst and specifically impressed with the communicating maths project. So by pulling this out as a discrete module and a discrete piece of assessment, so they could really engage with this and produce some high quality work, has really kind of paid off, at least for this student. So then we kind of wanted to expand with these iPads, wanted to make sure that we could have give students more opportunity for choice in their assessment. So this is a more kind of traditional module now. So this is a third year real and complex analysis. So in this module, we got the LiDAR data, the light detection and ranging data for the campus from DEFRA, I think, the organisation that hold on to that, and use this as a basis for doing some kind of calculus questions. So here, this is an animation of the data, and then we gave the students a quartic polynomial, which is a good approximation of this, and then told them to do some calculus on this. And as part of this, we asked the students to choose how they wanted to demonstrate their these various kind of learning outcomes. So question 5 here is asking the students for proof that all multivariable polynomials are differentiable. And how do I want this demonstrated? Well, either write an explanation, draw an illustration, record an audio explanation, or record a video explanation. Like, does the student have enough of an understanding about the underlying concepts here, which theorems they need to plug in to prove this kind of general result? It doesn't really matter how they present that to me, as long as they can. And by making sure they have choices, they can well, choose. So we then, after kind of doing this for a year, we applied to get a very small pot of internal grant money to actually evaluate this. So we paid students to come and talk to us in focus groups and to fill in questionnaires. And we wanted to know, like, were they aware of the choices that they had? How did they make their choices, and what were their attitudes? And just kind of some data here. Now, it's a relatively small sample size. So we have what here, 13, 14 students who responded to this. But when we asked the students for which assessment best shows your ability, then most of them said written coursework, very few said long exams. So the student at the time of doing this survey, we still had students who had done exams in previous modules before we changed. So written coursework was very much the preference. The students think that also kind of conversations with lectures is a good way of demonstrating their ability. Now, this kind of comes into Martin's talk. How can we capture that and make that robust? A student has had a conversation with me, they've demonstrated some mathematical knowledge, that's sufficient for this module. So I think there's definitely something worth exploring there. That's a theme that I'll pull out in a second. We can then ask, so then in some of the analysis here, we asked, okay, so why have you chosen these things? Well, they said that the written coursework is easiest, they say. And in particular, the other forms of assessments, like presentations and multimedia submissions, are time-consuming and stressful. So I mean, we're speculating, but maybe the expectations weren't managed particularly well. Maybe we don't need to have slides in presentations. You know, there's a lot of time that goes into making slides. So there's some kind of feedback there. I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to kind of flick through this really, but it's interesting to see what the students think here. That they're aware that employers want critical thinking, and coursework is the best way to kind of demonstrate that. Is some feedback that we have there. They need to be able to kind of, they're always thinking about this in terms of how this is going to help their employability, and a piece of coursework enables them to demonstrate their demonstrate the skills that they have. So again, I'm going to skip over this, conscious of time. So this is where this all assessment theme comes out. But let me skip to that in a second. And when we ask them what the most challenging part of coursework is, then it is this English barrier. Writing the English explanation is significant for our students. So this is the thing which is preventing them from communicating their mathematical ideas. Whereas if so the speculation is that other forms of assessment, so whether that's oral, would be better for these students, or maybe they want to make a kind of a video instead. And a lot of stuff around anxiety here as well, is getting them to actually start the assessment. Whereas if you have a kind of summative thing at the end of a module, then they will perhaps have difficulty actually engaging with that. And a lot of the feedback is about deadlines. So again, just kind of skipping ahead. So this was one of the emergent themes which came out. So one of in these focus groups, the students are saying, well, actually, what would be great would be to have the grade determined by contributions in class. And this would be a less pressured environment. There's more opportunity to demonstrate knowledge, and their understanding is the lecturer knows them well, and so can make a good judgment about over a series of weeks the quality of their mathematical understanding. So yes, constant questions in the classroom where you can demonstrate your thinking, and also kind of problems to solve. So and again, thinking about employability, wanting to have an interview-like format. So it encourages you to think at the moment, but also where it is a dialogue. It's not a kind of set series of questions that are asked, but an exploration where the lecturer is kind of crafting questions in the moment to try and really probe the student's understanding of a particular topic. So there's so yeah, so we then asked them, okay, well, how do we want to how should we develop this sort of teaching? And they are very aware that we need to make sure we have good communication, good relationship with teachers, and that's the way to so that they're comfortable to have these encounters where so what am I trying to say here? So I lost the thread of this. Yes, it's all about managing the anxiety. So we don't kind of go straight away from the start of the sorry, I lost the thread there. If you forgive me, I'm going to skip on to this idea of kind of student choice, because this is the main kind of theme of this talk. So, so when we ask them about choice and being able to kind of choose elements of assessment, then we got a lot of good feedback. You know, they think that they have by giving them the choice in the form of their assessment, then they will be able to learn new things. They can choose particular skills that they want to pick up, for example, and that leads into this kind of general idea of authentic assessment, conscious of time. I just want to move ahead to this. So here's this diagram again about how authentic assessment contains these two strands. So there's the output that's appropriate for professional roles, and there's input that's appropriate for professional roles. So here's this institutional definition, which hopefully will kind of clarify some things. So authentic assessment is realistic, requires judgment and innovation, and replicates or simulates the context in which adults are tested in the workplace. So try and find kind of workplace-like or employment-like activities which our students are able to take to a job interview and say, I've done something like this in my degree. And that's kind of the idea. And the critical thing is that that students will have a wide range of ways of tackling a problem or tackling a piece of assessment, and they can make decisions about how they want to negotiate complex tasks, and there should also be opportunities to rehearse, to practice, to consult resources, and to get feedback. So it is an iterative, the assessments are kind of iterative. So let's look at some examples, yes, I've already talked about how they're distinct from applied forms. Let's look at some examples. I think this would be a good way to kind of to continue, again, conscious of time. So this was a piece of assessment we set in 23-24. We had a module called problem solving and communication. And we had a space theme for this because we had a small grant from the STSC. And these were the questions that we asked students. So this was worth about half of the module, so 30 credits. This was about 15 credits worth of assessment. And we gave students a list of vague questions. So, you know, we're not giving them any numbers here. We're not giving them any a particular problem. So, for example, we're asking, celestial bodies tend to be approximately spherical. How can we measure how spherical they are to compare them? It's not it invites the students to do some research. We hadn't had any lectures on how to measure how spherical something is. So it's very much kind of a small research project. This is group work. The students choose a vague prompt and then they work on this in the timetabled lectures. But critically with this, we tell them at the top of the rubric, you're primarily being assessed on the approach you take to solving problems rather than the actual solution. And this is reflected in the marking criteria here. So we're not moving away from grading, although it was a very interesting talk that Martin gave, which has made me think maybe we should be doing that. But we do have a detailed rubric, a detailed mark scheme, so we know kind of how many marks to give the students for various things. But critically, it is the problem-solving element, 30 marks of this, which forms the bulk of the report, at least. And this is about the students giving a thorough description of how they've approached the problem. So they explain what they've tried that didn't work. It's a narrative piece. It's not about the solution itself. The solution is only 10 marks out of the 100 here. And part of this should also include kind of descriptions about how the group has interacted. And the students love this module, and so we have really kind of lots of fantastic feedback. And it also kind of lends itself to being done outside of the classroom as well. So we've held sessions in the British Museum, the British Library, and the Science Museum as just places to go and think difficult thoughts about this vague problem. And the students really kind of responded well to that. So just to give an example of a couple of submissions, so we had kind of one submission which was about the engine effects on trajectories. This got a high mark, 85%. They followed a good problem-solving method. So first of all, some simplification. They identified 4 particular cases they would like to look at. They found some appropriate theory on ellipses and wrote some code, and then compared it with ChatGPT output and decided that their work was better than ChatGPT. And then they had a reflective component at the end where they decided whether they would look back to say, okay, what could I have done better there? Whereas another submission, which was, I think, read more like a traditional essay somehow, with a lot of historical context, and results were reported and referenced rather than kind of explored in this problem-solving way. So there was just about a pass grade that, but there was the definite kind of difference in those 2 submissions. Whereas the problem-solving aspect we think is more kind of employable for students, or it showcases better kind of employability skills. Another example from statistics. So here we had a statistics module. Again, this is second year, level 5. So we asked them to first of all identify a topic that was interesting to them. Actually, try to get their engagement in this. Don't give them data, but ask them, okay, find some data. There's lots of kind of sources, and we had some lectures about how to find a good data source. The brief is then open-ended, so we asked them to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of summary statistics and confidence intervals, not calculate this confidence interval or this summary statistic, but for them to make a judgment about which ones they want to use. And we also baked in kind of multiple contact points while they're completing this assignment. So we say you must show a draft to your lecturer by this date in November. And this does 2 things. It forces some element of formative feedback at that point, but also it gives the opportunity for the lecturer to then set a bespoke question based on the work that the student has done so far. Now, this I think is authentic because this mirrors a sort of interaction that a graduate would have with a client. In employment, and also it lets us avoid any kind of solved questions. So, Kaggle data sets, for example, have got lots of code in there, and we can look to see if a particular question has been asked and make sure that we ask a slightly different one. We then, as part of this module, part of this assessment, we then get the students to kind of explicitly compare their work with the output of ChatGPT. Okay, so again, I think this is authentic because interviewees, they'll need to demonstrate what they can offer over AI and be aware of the kind of response that AI can give, so that they know what they should add on top of it. And it also means that by making it clear that we're going to do this comparison with a large language model, that they should not use the large language model in their answer to question 2, because then they'd be having to compare AI with AI, which is hard. So it's a way of kind of encouraging the students to have a go at this directly. Again, I've got some examples there, conscious of time. Just one kind of final example really, which is from calculus. Now, I wrote this piece of assessment when I was when I was going to be the lecturer for this module, but unfortunately there's a change. So this assessment we've not actually run. This is a second year multivariable calculus module. So I asked them to look around campus or at home for an object model in 3D, and writing a log of their thinking as they develop a parameterization for this surface. So and trying to kind of build a parameterization. So it's got some explicit human judgment in there. It's reasonably open-ended, but we give guidance on what the content should be. And again, there is bring some draft work to week 10. The lecturer will support this activity. Make sure there's lots of contact points. So, for example, I could think, okay, let's try banana. So I would think maybe, well, look, bananas are curved. Let's say the curve is a cubic. They can be sliced into circles. So I want to find the tangent planes of those circles and vary the radius of those circles. After thinking about that a little bit, I can produce a banana shape that looks like this. I asked ChatGPT to do the same thing, and it produces these equations like this. And it produces this shape here if you try to plot it, which is distinctly non-banana-like. Now, in all fairness, I ran that yesterday as well, and it's doing better. But there's some kind of there's still a gap between a logged bit of kind of human judgment about building this up, and here are some equations which are going to produce something which is increasingly but not entirely unlike a banana. And again, some more kind of compare their work with ChatGPT. I'm conscious I'm over time now, so I'm going to stop speaking in a second. But just to say that in other modules, we also have kind of randomly generated questions in coursework. We did some attitudinal surveys with students, which were in a pair of talks in CETL MSOR 2024. And we asked them these various kind of elements here, and students are broadly very positive about these elements of artificial intelligence, choice, problem solving, and reflection. They feel that they're making them more confident in mathematics and are helping them prepare for their career. And in a handful of cases, they're increasing their anxiety. And that's all I wanted to talk to you about today. I have a summary slide, but I'm conscious I'm over, so I will stop speaking now. Thank you.